Well, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Bill Barney, who is CEO of Reliance Communications, and he is also chairman and CEO of Global Cloud Xchange, the world's largest private undersea cable system seller. Bill, great to have you on the show and good to see you again. Let's start with Reliance Communications. I know you wear two hats there, but let's start with the company, because that is really what has caught some concern among shareholders, as we were just discussing there. And this idea of your current proceedings around the bankruptcy situation. I mean, there has been some doubts as to what that will mean for your debt pile, for concerns about restructuring that debt. What would you say to investors who still have those concerns today?
Well, I think the one of the challenges in India right now is this process is we're pioneers in the bankruptcy process, or NCLT. There's only been 12 or 14 companies that have actually gone through this. So the challenge is how do you actually move through it? And what we're doing right now is we're trying to put it into a court run process, and then we'll do the best we can to essentially take care of all of the stakeholders that we can.
And what's the best outcome then, as you see it? What would you like to see getting through this process and then the next stage for Reliance Communications?
Well, I think what we'd like to see is the essentially the sale of the assets, which we started working on a year ago, and we need. And the challenge has been obviously to get the bank group to agree to the final plan, and so I think it's get a final plan through and move quickly through it. These situations, the most important thing to do is to move quickly, and that's what we want to make sure that we do with the assets.
Can you give us an idea, Bill, as to what went wrong?
I don't think anything went wrong. I mean, I think you've got an industry very similar to the United States after the Telecom Act of 1995. You had, in 2001, you had almost 40% of the companies either go bankrupt or had issues. Here you had a new carrier that came in that actually offered a price of zero for traffic to consumers for almost 6 months. 3 companies went down. It wasn't just us. I mean, we were part of an industry that sort of took on a pretty difficult stage. And Tata Communications exited, Aircell exited. So it's not just Reliance Communications. And to be honest, our enterprise business continued to flourish. Our overseas businesses have still been very, very strong. So we're fortunate that we had almost 50% of our businesses were still running. The challenge we had is they were all under the same umbrella, and they were under the same stock, right? Which is one of the challenges we had, where the other companies were able to stay. And for example, Tata Communications has an enterprise wing and had a wireless wing. They were able to close the wireless wing and let the enterprise wing go forward. So I think we're in a difficult situation as we have to manage through that, transition that process, and then move on. And,
if I can understand this correctly, it's really the pricing environment that is extreme, and you were a casualty of that. Do you think that you can rebuild and come out of this?
Well, I don't think we'll ever be in the wireless business again. I think we made the right choice to leave. And to be honest with you, I don't think this is the first or the last time you're going to see this happening around the world. I think a lot of the fundamental issues that were being faced with 4G and 5G investment versus what the ARPUs are, that situation is going to proliferate into the United States, into Europe. I think you'll actually see these problems hitting also European and U.S. telcos over the next 5 years. So this is not going to be just an Indian problem. It's going to be a worldwide problem. And we just happen to be at the pointy edge of it because we had the tightest pricing problems.
I'm just curious, Bill, what sort of instructions or guidance have you got from Anil Ambani on taking the company forward? I mean, what sort of ideas has he got? Because Arcom is controlled by Anil Ambani.
Well, it's controlled. It's a public company. I think Anil Ambani's strategy is to do the best thing he can for his stakeholders in the situation. That's what you do in these challenging times. You actually have to look to your debtors and your fellow equity holders and try and find the best solution and get there quickly. That's what he's trying to do. So I think that's what you'll see.
What does 5G mean for you at the head of Reliance Communications? I mean, what opportunity does this present? Also a very competitive race at the moment.
Well, I think 5G, interestingly enough, is we actually use it for our enterprise business. Right. It is replacing fiber as an alternative for last mile. And so if you look at, for example, the banking sector in India today, most of their branches actually run 5G connections. So they're actually connecting to the networks with 5G rather than using fiber. And it's going to be a very, very good alternative to replace fixed line networks. And it's much easier to deploy, obviously. You run an antenna and you can hit multiple buildings versus having to dig up the ground in a place like India where that can be a challenge, right? So,
Scott, want to come in here?
Right. It's got in Chicago, and I'm not going to ask you to name names as far as telecom businesses in the United States, but what is the sort of telecom business here in the United States that you think would be troubled, given the way that you've described that some of these companies here in the United States and in Europe might have trouble? What would you be looking for a company that you think would have trouble in the next 4 or 5 years?
I think if you're completely exposed to the wireless consumer space, and that's your only business, I think that you're going to find it challenging, I think, in the next 5 years. I think if you've got a diverse strategy where you have an enterprise business, you have a consumer business, I think you can pull through. But I think the challenge, I think, is the consumer-only strategy. I think you're going to continue to see, right now, when we look around the world, most consumers on a cash flow basis, they're actually not making money for most wireless companies. Okay, so they're spending more capex per user than they're actually generating in revenue, and it's that's the challenge. And it's not coming out in their financials, but it will as you start to see all these companies start to pile on more and more debt, trying to stay in the market. I think the challenge will be if you're not in the right space, it can be a tough place to be.
All right, well, that lets me ask a question where I can ask you to name names. Who do you think is doing well in the way that you've described? What U.S. companies do you think are doing well in the way that you have described, in that they have a mix of, we'll call it mix of payers with a healthy enterprise business and are not necessarily completely dependent on consumer wireless business?
Well, I think AT&T and Verizon both have a diverse customer base. The reality is they are largely consumer based, but they have enough to, I think, to sustain through the challenge. I think the third and fourth and fifth operators in the country may feel some challenges as they're only consumer focused.
Phil, a big part of your time is over at the Global Cloud Exchange as well. I mean, we're talking about the subsea cable systems. What does that business look like today? I mean, where's the real growth going to come from?
Well, it's interesting. That is probably the most, it's the booming sector right now. The fiber, exactly. The undersea fiber business is exploded in the last 2 years. And it's interesting, as we've had challenges in India, I've actually had the opposite problem, which is high growth outside of India. Right now, we're actually looking at deploying a new cable system called Eagle, which will actually go from Asia all the way to Europe. And that cable will actually be 5 times the size of any cable we've ever put in the water before. And by the way, we don't think that the demand for that cable, it will take it out. We'll actually run out of supply on that cable within 5 years. That's how fast it's moving right now.
There's been some concern talked about recently as part of this tech fight between China and the U.S. Obviously, Huawei has been in the headlines for several reasons, but also some discussion about what they're doing in the way of subsea cables too, and whether or not those cables could be susceptible to spying, to security concerns, as they already are. I mean, does that give you an advantage in any way?
Well, I think we're fortunate. We've been doing it for a long time, so we've actually we know the tricks of the trade. But yeah, no, these are challenging times, and I think people are starting to realize that a large portion of the world's economy rides on these cables. And if something happens to them, they are exposed. They're 3,000 feet below the water, but they're on the seabed, and anyone can get to them if they want to. So it is a challenge.
In terms of hacking, security threats, is that something you worry about on a daily basis?
Oh yeah, that's probably one of our most, and we do a lot on security on the shore end. So as it's close to the last 5 miles in the country, we really focus a lot of energy on making sure that the cable systems are well guarded and no one goes near them.
Phil, can we bring it back to India? Do you think that the regulations and the policy framework is keeping up with developments in your business and your industry that are really progressing at a breakneck speed? And if I can ask you, as far as the election is concerned, do you think who, in your mind, has got the best plan to take digital India to its next phase?
Well, it's interesting. It's Modi's coming up for election, but he's had the challenge has been obviously the telecom industry has blown up. But in many ways, that's a good thing, I think, because as we saw, the tech run we've had over the last 20 years largely came out of a telecom breakdown in the United States. And so the reality is this can spur a lot of growth in other sectors by bringing low-cost communications. So I think, what I would say is it may look like the telecom industry is cratered a little bit, but the reality is I think he may have actually opened it up in such a way that new players can enter and that you'll actually start to see that growth that we saw in the United States. In fact, I would argue that I think the infrastructure will be some of the lowest priced infrastructure in the markets over the next couple of years, and hopefully will spur on that growth. So I think his plan, obviously these things take time, and the politicians will take credit for it. Whether it's luck or whether it's reality, I don't know. I mean, it's and that's, you look back at the United States, and people said the 1995 Telecom Act was important, and reality was that the spur on the change, or was it the fact that banks were banking these guys? So there's a lot of factors that can drive it.
And Bill, let me just give you the last word, and my question is a global one. 5G. A particularly vexed issue politically when you consider what's been going on with Huawei and the cybersecurity issues, the espionage issues. Is 5G the battleground in terms of the trade conflict?
Honestly, these things will get fixed. 5G, they'll reach a solution, okay? And there'll be a 5G solution that works in all the countries, that deals with technology from both the Americans and the Chinese. I mean, right now, you're at a pointy end, and there's a lot of saber rattling. I think, honestly, people will come to realize that there's no point in having every network. It's like going back to the old CDMA world versus GSM. Yeah. You don't want to have two networks running in every country. We can't afford it, and it's an industry that's not necessarily thriving right now. So the reality is, you really have to. I think smart minds will come together and they'll agree. And necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? Yes. Bill, great conversation. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, sir.